Hello, welcome to today's lesson.
Today we are going to talk about imperialism.
In order to talk about imperialism, we have to know what it means.
Imperialism is a term used when a country expands its current power and influence through diplomacy or military forces throughout other lands and countries that are weaker than their own.
They usually have motives for this big movement. These motives usually fall around economic reasons like industries and resources and customers to sell to. Another reason would be military factors and nationalism.
Our country first put its foot through the door of imperialism with the purchasing of Alaska.
Beginning in 1725, when Russian Caesar Peter began to explore the Alaskan coast, Russia had a keen interest in this region, which was rich in natural resources and lightly inhabited.
As the United States expanded westward in the early 1800s, Americans soon found themselves in competition with Russian explorers and traders. However, they lacked the financial resources to support major settlements or military presence along the Pacific coast of North America, so we had them outnumbered.
Russia offered to sell Alaska to the United States in 1859, believing the United States would follow set the designs of Russia's greatest rival in the Pacific, Great Britain.
Are you recording me getting the drink of water? Okay. The looming U.S. Civil War delayed the sale, but after the war, Secretary of State William Seward quickly took up and renewed Russia's offer, and on March 30th, 1867, agreed to a proper proposal from Russian minister in Washington, Edward D. Stockdale, to purchase Alaska for $7.2 million.
The Senate approved the Treaty of Purchase on April 9th. President Andrew Johnson signed the treaty on May 28th, and Alaska was finally transferred to the United States on October 18th, 1867. Sounds like we got lucky on that one.
Russia is not a country I'd want to mess with.
Well, that's not the only thing America has had struggles with. What are you wearing?
What are you wearing?
I thought we were still in Alaska.
No, we're talking about Hawaii now.
Oh, well. During the 1830s, Britain and France forced Hawaii to accept treaties giving them economic privileges.
In 1842, Secretary of State Daniel Webster sent a letter to the Hawaiian agents in Washington affirming the U.S. interest in Hawaii and opposing annexation by any other nation. He also proposed to Great Britain and France that no nation should seek special privileges or engage in any further colonization of this island.
In 1849, the United States and Hawaii concluded a treaty of friendship that served as the basis of official relations between the parties, a key provisioning a spot for American whaling ships, fertile ground for American missionaries, and a new source of sugarcane production. America had a big sweet tooth, and the loss of this area would put a damper on the candy and sugar.
Hawaii's economy became increasingly integrated with the United States. In 1875,
I'm Michael Jordan. Stop it. Get some help.
Oh, can't read that. Okay, wait. Okay. Hawaii's economy became increasingly integrated with the United States, and in 1875, a trade treaty further linked the two countries, and U.S. sugar plantation owners from the United States came to dominate the economy and policies of the state.
And I'm back. When Queen Luclani moved to establish a stronger monarchy, Americans under the leadership of Samuel Dole deposed her in 1893. The planters believed that a cope and annexation by the United States would remove the threat of a devastating tariff on their sugar, also spurred them to action.
The administration of President Benjamin Harrison encouraged the takeover and dispatched sailors from the USS Boston to the island to surround the royal palace. The U.S. Minister to Hawaii, John L. Stevens, worked closely with the new government, and Dole sent delegates back to Washington.
Dole declared Hawaii an independent republic spurred by the nationalism aroused by the Spanish-American War. The United States annexed Hawaii in 1898, and at the urging of President William McKinley, Hawaii was made a territory in the 1900s.
Dole became its first governor. Racial attitudes and party politics in the United States deferred state schools until a bipartisan compromise linked Hawaii's status to Alaska, and both became a state in 1959. I'm sorry for beating you up.
It's okay. U.S. interest in purchasing Cuba had begun long before 1898. Following the 10-Year War, American sugar interests brought up large tracts of land in Cuba.
Alterations in the U.S. sugar tariff favoring homegrown best sugar helped format the rekindling of the revolutionary favor in 1895. By the time the U.S. had more than 50 million investments in Cuba and annual trade, mostly in sugar, it was worth twice that much.
President William McKinley, interrogated on March 4th, 1897, was even more anxious to become involved. Particularly after the New York Journal published a copy of a letter from Spanish Foreign Minister Enrique Duque de Lemo criticizing the American presidency on February 1898.
Events moved swiftly after the explosion aboard the USS Maine on February 15th on March 9th. On March 9th, Congress passed a law associating $50 million to build up military strength, and on March 28th, the U.S. Naval Court of Inquiry found that a mine blew up in the Maine.
On April 21st, President McKinley orders a blockade of Cuba. 4 days later, the U.S. declares war. On April 25th, 1898, the United States added their Teller Amendment, asserting that it would not attempt to exercise hegemony over Cuba. Fighting began in the Philippines Island at the Battle of Manila Bay on May 1st, where Commander George Dewey reported exclaimed, "You may fire when ready, Gridley," and the Spanish fleet under Real Admiral Patricio Montojo was destroyed. Total U.S. Army strength at the time totaled 26,000, requiring the passage of the Mobilization Act on April 22nd that allowed for an army at first 125,000 volunteers, later increased to 200,000, and a regular army of 65,000. On June 22nd, U.S. troops landed in Daiquiri, where they were joined by Calixto Garcia and about 5,000 revolutionary U.S. troops. Attacked the San Juan Heights on July 1st, 1898.
Dismounted troops, including the African-American 9th and 10th Cavalries and the Rough Riders, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Theodore Roosevelt, went up against Cattle Hill, while the force led by Brigadier General Jacob Kent charged up San Juan Hill and pushed Spanish troops further inland, while inflicted 1,700 casualties.
Okay. While U.S. commanders were deciding on a further course of action, Admiral Silvera left port only to be defeated by Shirley. On July 16th, the Spaniards agreed to unconditional surrender of the 500,000 troops around the city. A few days later, Major General Nelson Miles sailed from Guatemala to Puerto Rico. His forces landed near and marched to San Juan with virtually no opposition.
Representatives from Spain and the United States signed a peace treaty in Paris on December 10, 1898, which established the independence of Cuba, Sede, Puerto Rico, and Guam to the United States and allowed the victorious power to purchase the Philippine Islands from Spain for $20 million. The war had cost the United States $250 million and 3,000 lives, of whom 90% had perished from infection disease.
The defeat of the Spanish Navy in the Atlantic and Pacific, and specifically with the addition of the Philippines as a base for American ports and coaling stations, the United States was ready to try and make the myth a reality.
Tired of waiting for your packages to come in on time? Let me explain to you the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal cuts across lithium's part of Panama and is conducted of maritime trade. It is one of the largest and most difficult engineering projects ever taken. The Panama Canal shortcuts greatly and reduces the times of ships to travel between the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. The project originally started with Colombia and France, but America took it over on May 4, 1904, and opened the canal on August 15, 1914. After a period of joint American-Panama control, the canal was taken over by Panama's government in 1999. It is now managed and operated by the government-owned Panama Canal Authority.
Although China originally accounted for only a small percentage of American foreign trade, captains of American industry dreamed of a vast market of Asian customers desperate for manufactured goods they could not yet produce in large quantities for themselves. American businesses were not alone in seeing these opportunities.
Other countries, including Japan, Russia, Great Britain, France, and Germany, also helped to make inroads in China. Previous treaties between Great Britain and China in 1842 and 1844, during the Opium Wars, when the British Empire military concreted the Chinese Empire to accept the imports of Indian opium in exchange for their tea.
They had forced an open-door policy on China, in which all foreign nations had free and equal access to the Chinese ports. This was a time when Great Britain maintained the strongest economic relationship with China. However, the other Western nations used the new arrangement to send Christian missionaries who began to work across the inland China.
Alarmed by the pace at which foreign powers further divided China into pseudo territories and worried that they had no significant peace for themselves, the United States government intervened. In contrast to Europe nations, however, American businesses wanted a whole market, not just a share of it.
They wanted to do business in China with no artificial constructed spheres or boundaries to limit the extent of their trade, but without territorial entanglements or legislative responsibilities that anti-imperialists opposed.
With the blessing and assistance of the Secretary of State, John Hay, several American businessmen created the American Asiatic Association in 1896 to pursue greater trade opportunities in China. In 1899, Secretary of State Hay made a bold move to acquire China's vast market for Americans access by introducing the open door notes, a series of circular notes that Hay himself drafted as an expression of U.S. interest in the region and sent to the other competing powers.
These notes, if agreed to by the other 5 nations maintaining spheres of influence in China, would erase all the spheres and open all the doors to free trade with no special tariffs or transportation controls that would give unfair advantages to one country over another. Specifically, the notes required that all countries agree to maintain free access to all treaty ports in China, to pay railroad charges and harbor fees, and that only China would be permitted to collect any taxes on trade within its borders. while on paper the open door notes would offer equal access to all.
The open doors would flood the Chinese markets with American goods, virtually squeezing other countries out of the market. Although the foreign ministers of the other 5 nations sent half-hearted replies on behalf of their respective governments, with some outright denying the viability of the notes, Hay proclaimed that the new official policy on China and Americans' goods were unleashed throughout the nation.
These notes were invoked barely a year later, when a group of Chinese insurgents, the Righteousness and Harmonious Fist, also known as the Boxer Rebellion, fought to expel all Western nations and their influences from China.
The United States, along with Great Britain and Germany, sent over 2,000 troops to withstand the rebellion. The troops signified Americans' commitment to the territorial integrity of China. Alabama one flooded with American products. Despite the subsequent efforts by Japan, in the particular to undermine Chinese authority in 1951, and again during the Manchurian crisis of 1931, the United States remained resolute in defense of the open door principles throughout World War I.
Only when China turned to communist in 1949, following an intense civil war, did the principles become relatively meaningless. However, for nearly half a century, U.S. military involvement and a continued relationship with the Chinese government created their roles as preferred trading partners, illustrating how the country used economic power as well as military might to grow its empire.
The Great White Fleet was a popular nickname for the group of United States Navy battleships which completed a journey around the globe from December 16, 1907 to February 22, 1909 by order of President Theodore Roosevelt. Its mission was to make friendly courtesy visits to numerous countries while displaying new U.S. naval power to the world.
One goal was deter a threatened war with Japan since tensions were high in 1907. It familiarized the 500,000 officers and men with the logistical and planning needs for extended fleet action far from home. Hulls were painted a stark white, giving the Armada its nickname. It consisted of 16 battleships divided into 2 squadrons, along with various small escorts. Roosevelt sought to demonstrate growing American military power and blue water Navy capability. After long neglecting the Navy, Congress started generous appropriations in the late 1880s. Beginning with just small ships, over 1/3 of them wooden and obsolete, the Navy quickly added new steel fighting vessels. The fleet's capital ships were already obsolete compared to the British in 1907. Nevertheless, it was by far the largest and most powerful fleet that had ever circled the globe. The mission was a success at home and in every country it visited. So Hannah, what have we learned today?
Let's review, shall we?
Russia wanted Alaska, but we had more money, so we won.
Hawaii had our sugar, so we bought it.
Cuba wanted to be free from Spain, so we decided to fight for it.
China had our goods, so we had arguments with them for not sharing.
We saw there was fighting going on, so we stepped in with our awesome Navy.
We had made a canal that made way for multiple things.
So overall, imperialism has made our country better.
Our country has always had challenges, but we have always overcome.
Thanks for listening!